Hi, I'm Dawn Cavanaugh, APQS National Education Director and Customer Service Manager. One of the very first questions that students ask during the free beginner class that comes with every APQS Longarm machine purchase is, how do I get the quilt on the frame? Of course, we've all come to a Longarm from the experience of having to crawl around on the floor and baste our layers together using safety pins, and then trying to shove this gigantic quilt through the small opening in our home sewing machines. It's a joy to have all of this open space to quilt and not have to worry about basting the layers anymore. But it's a new experience, one that is super simple and easy to do thanks to the way the APQS tables are designed. Simple, convenient features such as rollers that are mounted up top so that I don't have to continue crawling on the floor to get at the canvases to attach the frame are important. Plus, extra things such as a braking system that allows me to infinitely adjust each roller independently instead of worrying about being caught between the teeth or cogs on a wheel at the end of the table. Make it easy to adjust the frame for every unique quilt. And optional features such as the automatic quilt advance that's available on the deluxe table mean that all the layers even roll together consistently at the same time. So I don't have to worry about any wrinkles or tucks or puckers on the quilt as I work through. And one last thing that makes it super nice is that the APQS pickup roller is situated in the deepest part of the throat. The pickup roller is where all of the quilt collects as I work through the project. The leveler bar, situated down low, makes sure that the quilt stays perfectly flat as I'm working all the way down to the end of the quilt. I don't have to stop and raise this bar up as the quilt and the batting starts to accumulate on this roller and starts to constrict in the throat. So I always maintain that same consistent quilting space. Well, there are two different methods that I'd like to talk to you about today to how to load a quilt. Now, there are lots of different options available for you, everything from pins to zippers to even a snapping system that's out on the market. So I'd like to talk to you about two possibilities today, one called fully floating and the other partially floating a quilt top. With those two methods, we do attach the backing completely to the frame, but we can play a little bit with the quilt top itself. With a full float method, the quilt top is not directly attached to any part of the quilting frame itself. Instead, it rests on the batting and the backing and is held in place with basting stitches or with pins. It's a very fast, quick, easy way to get something loaded on the frame. By contrast, a partial float means that I have attached part of the quilt to the frame, usually the quilt top roller. The opposite end then gets pinned or basted as well right before I start. Today, since we're learning about full and partial floating, the one layer that needs to be completely attached to the frame is the backing. We always want the backing to be smooth. So I am attaching it to the roller marked quilt backing roller, and then I will take it and attach it to the pickup roller on the opposite side of the machine. There are several different ways to actually load fabric onto a Longarm frame, and the method you choose really just depends on which part of the process you enjoy versus which you might want to change a little bit about. I personally am still a quilt pinner even after all of these years because I just like that ultimate control that it gives me. It makes the fabric behave just the way I want it to behave. Now that I have the backing attached to the backing roller on my frame, I'll wind that up and smooth it out as I roll. Next, I'll take the opposite end and attach it to the quilt pickup roller on the opposite side of the table. Here's another helpful tip when actually loading the backing fabric on your frame. If possible, try to load it so that any seams run parallel to your rollers or horizontal on the quilting frame. That makes it much easier to reduce bulk and decrease the chance that there might be a pleat or a tuck in the backing. In fact, if you have enough fabric, press the seam open as you see here. That will also further help to reduce the chances of getting any kinds of puckers on the back of the quilt as you work. APQS machines have this very helpful table set up where a leveler bar resides in the throat of the machine. This leveler bar helps to make sure that no matter how much quilt is accumulating on the pickup roller for me, the quilt will always stay nice and level inside my quilting space where I'm doing all of the work. So as I load the backing fabric onto the quilt pickup roller, it's important that I pass it underneath the leveler bar and bring it all the way over to the pickup roller. Another optional feature that makes that super handy is the automatic quilt advance available on our deluxe tables. I love the automatic quilt advance because it makes sure that all of my layers pull consistently at the same time, and it makes it very fast and convenient. Its switch on the side of the machine allows me to quickly advance the quilt by rolling the quilt ahead, or even unroll the quilt and go the opposite direction if I need to take the quilt off the frame. Another really handy feature associated with the automatic quilt advance is the foot pedal. It's located right in the center of my table, so I can press the green pedal when I'm ready to advance the quilt, and the white one if I need to back up a little bit and get back to an area I previously quilted. I also really like that I can control each of these rollers with just the lift of this simple handle. That releases the pressure on the braking system so that I can roll each of my rollers independently. I can wind up the backing roller or wind up the quilt top roller and easily adjust how much pressure or how firmly it's held onto based on how hard I push that handle down. Next, I'll bring that extra canvas from the pickup roller down and up across the top of that leveler bar. That way, once I attach the backing fabric to this side, everything will automatically be underneath this leveler bar to keep my space nice and flat and my quilting space consistent from beginning to the end of the quilt. Well, I have unwound my backing fabric and brought the excess all the way across over to the quilt pickup roller. Next, I'll simply align those raw edges and pin them right to the canvas itself. Personally, I prefer to start in the center of the pickup roller, aligning my center of the backing with the center of the roller, and then I work out to the left and to the right with my pins as I go. This helps to ensure that I'm putting the backing on smoothly and straight, and it also helps to eliminate any possible wrinkles as I'm winding the fabric back onto the roller. Now I have the entire backing attached to the frame since it's attached to the pickup roller and the quilt backing roller on the opposite side. Now when I lift this quilt up and drop it down, this backing, it's going to fall underneath the leveler bar so that all of my layers will be properly loaded. Now that the backing is attached to the pickup roller and it's beneath the leveler bar, all I need to do is press the foot pedal on the automatic fabric advance and wind the quilt backing up. Remember, when doing a full float method, we really aren't using the quilt top roller at all. We'll slip the batting down between the two rollers and line up the raw edge on the opposite side, roughly in line with where the pins or your attaching devices are holding your quilt back to the pickup roller. Then all you need to do is tighten it up, leave a little bit of gap to make it easier to slip the quilt top through, and then we'll put the quilt top in place and I'll show you how to use the channel locks to make the quilt nice and straight as you go. I've left about 1.5 inches or 2 inches away from the top edge where I have pinned it to the frame. This method is really great if you're doing pantographs, for example, and need to quilt off the edge of the quilt top and back on again. It makes sure that you still have enough room on the backing to do that and not stitch on your canvases. So clearly it's not tight enough yet for me to start stitching, so I will wind up the backing onto the backing roller to smooth it out. Then I'll show you how to use the channel locks to make sure that we start out straight and keep the quilt straight all the way as we go. All APQS stand-up models include a horizontal directional lock to make basting your quilt tops easy. On these models, simply rotate the knob until the bumper runs into the carriage. That prevents the machine from moving forward and backward and allows it to slide to the left and right. The Milli and the Milli 30 models of APQS quilting machines include electronic directional locks. I can quilt left to right simply by touching a button, and my lines will be nice and straight. It's really great for modern quilting, and in this case, our situation where we are floating a quilt top. We'll use that to baste the top down. Touching the button on the other side locks the machine in the vertical direction. Now I can do nice straight stitches vertically, as well as baste the left and right edges of my quilt down with perfect straight lines. When floating your quilt top, you can use the directional lock in one of two ways. As a shortcut, you can align the back of the foot right next to the edge of your quilt top. Then engage the horizontal directional lock and baste the quilt down simply by moving the machine to the right. If your quilt top border is a little wavy and you feel that you need to do a little bit more to ease it in or coax it into shape along the way, another way to use that directional horizontal lock is to simply draw a basting line on the batting first. Align the needle about 1 inch to 1.5 inches away from your canvas and away from whatever method you've used to attach your backing to the frame. Then engage the horizontal directional lock and stitch a basting line right through the batting and the backing. Now that you've got a perfectly straight reference line in place, you can bring the raw edge of the quilt top right up to that reference line. Now you can hold it in place with whatever method is necessary. You might choose to go back and baste it again one more time, or if by chance your border has a few little ripples or ridges in it, you can first hold those in place with some pins out along this area. Then use the quilting machine to baste it down. So sometimes quilts just don't turn out as perfect as we'd like them to be. If that's the case and you're trying to decide which loading method is best for you, you might want to consider a partial float instead of a full float. Remember, with that partial float, we are still attaching the quilt top to the quilt top roller itself. That way you'll be able to smooth things out and have the frame actually hold things in perspective and keep them nice and square for you. That's a lot easier than trying to deal with fabric floating down below or draping on the floor as you go. After you've attached your quilt to the quilt top roller, advance it and smooth it out to the left and to the right. Try to ensure that any straight lines, such as seam lines, still lay straight and parallel all the way along your roller. If you've got seams that are wrapping themselves around the roller, such as this seam and this seam which aligns with the sashing, then do your best to subtly work that seam a little bit tighter. That will help to compensate for the extra layers of fabric that are piling up here compared to no seams here in between. Continue winding until you've got the quilt completely wound up and ready to baste onto the opposite end, just as we did before. Now you can adjust the quilt top and the backing roller and tighten those up. Now with the quilt top at this stage, you're ready to tackle securing the top edge to the batting and the backing. If you choose to do the full float method and you find some fullness and issues with your quilt in terms of its construction, you might need to take a couple of extra steps there too. You may choose to use that horizontal directional lock and run a basting stitch inside the quilting area that you have somewhere close to this quilt top roller. That will trap the quilt between the two bars, the leveler bar and your quilt top roller, and at least secure that section for you as you work to prevent all of the fabric from shifting around. Of course, you could also do that with a few strategic straight pins holding the quilt in place also, so long as you watch out as you do your quilting. And now that you know about how to partially or fully float the quilt top, you've got even more shortcuts ready to go for your next quilting project. Thanks for watching us. Be sure to visit us at apqs.com. You'll also find us on Pinterest, Facebook, as well as Instagram. We'd love to have you join us in our quilting conversations.